Welcome to Practical Privacy. Today we're going to look at the challenge of building a scalable vendor assessment process for GDPR NIS2 in a multinational FMCG organization. And we have Natalija Bitiukova, Global Head of Data Protection for Carlsberg with us. How are you, Natalija?
Very well. Hi, Orla. Nice to talk to you today.
Great to have you here with us. So could you maybe give us a little bit of context around this particular challenge for you?
Look, I think this challenge is very common to the majority of the organizations. So on paper, the requirements are very clear what you have to do. You have to know your vendors, you have to vet your vendors, you have to know your risks, you have to manage your risks, you have to have clear action plans. In reality, the organizations, especially like the one I work for, that has grown through acquisitions, that operates across multiple jurisdictions. We have presence in 40 countries and exporting 125. And we're relying on the fragmented systems in the IT landscape. It's very difficult to make it operational in practice. So when we set to do this project and to conquer this challenge, we realized that we have approximately 50,000 to 70,000 vendors globally. So it's really not a small feast. It's everything from the core providers for the breweries to the smaller IT products to the SaaS systems to the local providers. And of course, each region has its own ways how they operate and manage vendors. So it meant inconsistent legal practices, heavy manual workloads, and standardizing vendor assessments is not literally only a legal challenge, is the organizational one. So this is what I would like to talk to you today.
Yeah, it sounds like a familiar challenge, all right. So what strategies, let's say, did you try initially that didn't prove successful?
So I think one of the key ones, and again, quite often I see that in the organizations, is running privacy and security assessments separately. So I've seen this pattern repeatedly in my career. Privacy runs in one lane, security runs in a different lane. Each team kind of does their job well, but they don't do the overall job that well together. So for vendors, it means answering multiple questionnaires coming from different teams within the same organization. Sometimes the questions are naturally overlapping because you need the same information to come to make your assessment. And for internal teams, it means multiple intake processes, inconsistent conclusions sometimes, as we might arrive to a slightly different understanding of the risk, and confusion as what matters most and what is the priority here that I have to tackle. So the second thing that didn't really work is not looking at the picture end to end. So focusing very much on the assessment, spending a lot of time developing the assessment template, right? And perfecting it and making it long and beautiful and aligned with all the regulatory requirements, but not thinking what happens afterwards when the assessment is answered. Do the risks get flagged? What does it mean in terms of the risk appetite of the organization? What do we do with those risks? Who owns them? Who actions them? What are the timelines for actioning them? And how do we monitor? So I often refer to this as paper compliance in some way, as it looks good on paper, but in practice, it unfortunately falls through.
100%. So how did you manage to get around this? What did you do in the end?
So it worked. The first thing that we've done is that we combined security and privacy assessments. We broke the silos and we decided that it is priority for both teams within the same time period, I must emphasize, to make sure that we have one single assessment, one single intake process, and one single way how we onboard the vendors through the digital compliance processes. And the second thing that we've done, which I think worked well, is we challenged ourselves. Was the question not only what the regulator would think, but what would be the perception of the end user? How would human being react to this assessment? So instead of asking questions, do you transfer the data to adequate jurisdictions, to the vendors who have no idea what is an adequate jurisdiction? Maybe they should know, but they don't. We just listed those countries saying, are you transferring data here? And instead of asking our employees, are you handling personal data, to which answer is unsurprisingly no. Very often we're saying, are you planning to put email addresses into this system? To which the answer is yes. So I think these two specific strategies proved very useful for us.
Yeah, I think it's very important to remember who's filling out the assessment doesn't have the same knowledge as who creates the assessment. Okay, so if you were to go back and do it again, what would you potentially do differently this time?
I think one thing we would plan the resources a bit more realistically when it comes to that. So obviously we're aiming to automation. Instead of having multiple emails, we wanted to have our assessments in a one single system, which we've done. But even when you have automation, you need to have human review, especially at the earlier stages, because a lot of your outputs depend on your inputs. And if the inputs by the end users are imperfect, then your outputs are imperfect as well. I'm sure at some point technology will move and become much smarter in this area, but still we need good data in order to have a very credible assessment. So we're still spending quite a lot of time on that specifically, and the resource planning for organizations of our size is, of course, should not be underestimated from the very beginning. And the second thing, I think we've done a great job at communicating that and trying to socialize the new approach within the organization. But what I would say is that if you think you communicated enough, communicate more and then a bit more, because there are for sure teams, especially in the large setups, which need to know but wouldn't know. So approaching that with the openness, with the friendliness, taking feedback in, especially at the pilot phases of such projects, that will create allies. Even if people are not perhaps excited about another assessment, we can, of course, try to create this as useful for them as it possibly can be. But communication and change management is critical for success of such projects.
Yeah, 100%. So if you could offer one piece of advice to your peers, what would it be?
Um, make this process not a privacy priority or security priority, but organizational priority. So it's and secure C-level leadership for such projects. There are multiple change management initiatives going at the same time. You're likely competing for the eyeballs with multiple other very, very, very important projects. So it cannot be just something that the DPO or CPO office is driving. It should come as a very strong tone from the top. It takes time to secure. It takes time to convince the leadership. So using more business argumentation, those processes often contribute heavily to cost cutting as well, and cost efficiencies, not only regulatory compliance, can really get you much further, and of course help to conquer some obstacles on the way.
Excellent. Really good advice. Actually, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Natalija, for taking the time today. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you for sharing your insights.
No worries. Was happy to do that. And if anyone has questions about this process, feel free to reach out.
So that's it for today. If you enjoyed, be sure to subscribe and share. Until next time.